Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the United She Stands podcast. Today, you only have me as a host, but that's okay. Ashley will return, I promise. And it's really okay because we have three incredible guests from the Canton City School District to talk about public schools in Ohio and what's at stake, especially in this election. So today we have Allie Childress, Jeff Talbert, and Paul Palomba. So I'll start with introing Allie. Allie is a school counselor at Canton City Schools. She grew up in Akron, Ohio, and graduated from Springfield Local Schools. She got her bachelor's in psychology and sociology, as well as her master's of education in school counseling from Bowling Green State University. She spent 2 years in North Carolina working as a school counselor in elementary schools and relocated back to Ohio and is entering her 4th year in Canton City Schools as a middle school counselor and serves on the CPEA board as an organizer. She also helps run the social media campaign Stark Voices for Public Education, which has a goal to get Stark County out to vote in favor of public education this November. We also have Jeff Talbert. He is the Canton City School Superintendent, and he is an educational leader dedicated to providing high-quality teaching and safe, engaging learning environments that help students grow into confident, creative, open-minded leaders. He returned to Canton City School District as superintendent in August 2020, following 7 years as superintendent of Alliance City Schools. A Canton Timken Alumni Hall of Fame inductee, Jeff holds a BA from Muskingum University and a Master of Education from Ashland University. And last but not least, we have Paul Palomba. He is the Canton Professional Educators Association president, and he was born and raised in Canton. He graduated with degrees in science and English from Kent State University and received his master's in curriculum from Mary Grove College. He taught 7th grade English in Canton City Schools for 16 years while serving as a building representative and executive leadership team member for the union. He has been the president of the Canton Professional Educator Association since 2013 and served as co-chair of the Ohio 8 Coalition from 2022 to 2025. Thousands of students have learned from him over the years, and he has helped guide thousands of educators in his positions with the union. His 4 children are all graduates of public schools, and his wife is a graduate of and now educator in Canton City Schools. Let me tell you, folks, we talk about school vouchers a lot on this podcast, but I learned so much from Paul, Allie, and Jeff about all the other things that these public schools are going through. And a lot of these are honestly caused by school vouchers. So please share this episode with folks and spread the word about what's going on in public education in Ohio. Hello, Jeff, Allie, and Paul. Welcome to United She Stands. I'm so excited to talk to y'all today. As we were briefly mentioning right before we started recording, Allie has been planning this episode basically for us for the past few months. So we are so appreciative of all your work, Allie, and we're just really excited to finally be having this conversation. So let's start off with a little bit of background from each of you. You each come at public education from a different angle. We have school counseling, the union, and the superintendent's office. Can each of you tell us a bit about your background and how you ended up doing this work in the Canton area schools? We'll start with Allie and then go to Jeff and then finish with Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Akron, Ohio, about 20 minutes north of Canton. I am a proud public school graduate from Springfield Local Schools. My mom is in her about 18th year in Akron Public Schools. So I grew up around public education. Even as a kid, I always knew what was going on in Columbus regarding public education. She always kept me up to date, very proud of the work that, public educators do. So I graduated from Bowling Green State University with my master's in school counseling and ended up going to North Carolina, where I was a school counselor in elementary education there for 2 years. When my now husband got out of the military, we came back up here and I ended up in Canton City. I'm just obviously overjoyed to be in Canton City. I'm going into my 4th year in one of the middle schools in Canton City. I absolutely love it. So I'm really happy to be here. Just this past year with the Amy Acton event that we helped organize, I started getting very involved with the union. I have this new kind of title of organizer that Paul has given me, and kind of getting very involved in that way. So really enjoying it.
Awesome. Jeff?
Yep. I am in my 32nd year in education. I've served as a special education teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent. I've been the superintendent here in Canton for the last 6 years, starting 7. This is my 7th year. I've taught in Canton for a year. Again, I've been an assistant principal here for 2, principal for 4. And this is my 4th return back to the district. I'm a proud graduate of Canton Timken Senior High School, which was one of the 2 high schools in the city at that time. And so this is a return home for me, which makes the work we do here personal. I got into education so that I could help ensure that the future students of Canton City got the same opportunities that I received and the same type of education that I got from the fine educators in this district.
So, hi, my name is Paul, and I am born and raised in Canton, Ohio all my life. And I have a pretty short story, actually. I went to Kent State University to become an English teacher, and Canton City Schools and Kent State at the time had a partnership or a coalition for student teaching. And my first assignment for student teaching was Lehman Middle School, and I never left. And that same summer, my cooperating teacher retired. I was not offered, I was asked if I had interest, and I applied. And then we ended up at the exact same classroom, and I did 7th grade language arts at the same school for 16 years. And then in that time, I was a building rep and an executive team member of our union. My father belonged to, he was a cement finisher and a bricklayer, and always held the union in very, very high regard. And so I always heard nothing but wonderful things. It was tough growing up. And I did notice that once my father joined the union, then all of a sudden we were able to have certain things that I had not seen before. So the union was very positive in my life. And so that's why I was drawn to the work. And so I've been the union president now for, I think this might be year 13 or 14, 29th or 30th year, something like that total.
Awesome. Really, like I mentioned, diverse backgrounds, but it's really cool that we all landed right here. And I should have mentioned this at the get-go, but my mom was a public school teacher. She taught at Manchester over in Portage Lakes. And both Ashley and I are a product of public schools ourselves. So, and just hearing the stories that my mom would come home and tell me, I could never do what y'all do. It is truly superhero level. So thank you for all of the work that you do and the heart and soul that you pour into Canton Public Schools. So
Thanks.
We know that unfortunately there's a lot that the public schools in Ohio are battling right now. And so Ohio's current budget sends billions to vouchers in charter and private schools, while districts like Jackson are covering the vast majority of their own costs through local property taxes, with the state kicking in only for a small fraction. So what's the real story behind school choice, quote unquote? And can you walk us through how we got here and what that funding gap actually means for a district day to day? We will start with Jeff here.
So school choice is something that was started a few years ago, I would say back with No Child Left Behind, as a way to make sure that students who were in districts that weren't doing well had an opportunity to go to good schools. And while I think that it was done with good intentions, where we've gotten to today has really gone off the rails. And so what we see is school choice has really gotten into a way, in my mind, and this is my personal opinion, where money is being funneled to private entities, where some of them have good ideals, they have a good purpose, and they really want to make a difference. But a lot of them are in it to see how much money they can get. And again, I'm not speaking for anybody except for Jeff Talbert on that one, but that's what I truly believe. And so what's happened now is we went from the vouchers for students who are in districts that weren't doing well or schools that weren't doing well to where everyone can get a voucher. What's being said now is like, it's a backpack bill. Kids are taking money wherever they want to go. And with that, there's little to no accountability for a lot of the dollars, the public dollars that are flowing to private schools and to charter schools. And so when you look at how public schools are funded, and so when you think back to when there was a lawsuit to say that there's an over-reliance on property taxes in the state of Ohio when it comes to funding schools, and when you do that, communities that have high property valuation have a little more money to spend than districts that don't. And so it was ruled unconstitutional, our formula. And the closest we've gotten to getting a formula that really equally supported schools was what we call the Fair School Funding formula. And that formula was put in place. It was supposed to be phased in. I mean, we were working through it. Fast forward to last year, our General Assembly put a stop to that. It was like, we're not going to fund it. We're going to shortchange public schools, traditional public schools, to nearly $2 billion. And then we're going to take that extra money and we're going to put it into a voucher program. Well, and by the way, we're going to shortchange you a little money, but you're still going to have to find a way, right, to make sure that the increased number of students who are going to private schools and charter schools are transported there, and that they get there on time, and that you pick them up on time. And if you miss, if you're late more than 5, 6, 7 times, then they can report you. And the first time they report you, then we're going to hold up your money and investigate. And the second time it happens, we're really going to hold your money. And so what ends up happening is there are added complexities to our transportation system. We have 7,000 students, a little over 7,000 students in the city of Canton. But every morning and every afternoon after school, our enrollment balloons to about 10,000. And we're responsible for getting those extra 3,000 students to school every day, which is not a problem. I went into education to educate all kids. So when those babies step on our bus, they're my babies, and we're going to make sure they get to and from safely. However, when it's a Canton City Schools, I can determine when we're going to let them out, the processes we're going to have in place for when kids come out of buildings and to get on the bus safely. I have phone numbers and contact information for parents, and I have phone numbers for administrators when things don't go well on those buses. I don't have all of those things for students at charter schools and non-pubs. So if a student is on the wrong bus, which happens every August, a kid from another district gets put on the wrong bus. So, and then we find out later that this kid doesn't belong to us and our bus isn't going to their community. And then when you go back to the school, they're gone. And so it's those types of things, those unfunded mandates that require us, right? We had to increase the amount of staff we have in our bus garage because transportation and getting kids to all of our schools to and from and all of our after school programs and their field trips and athletic events require people to do that. But then to do that for a bunch of other individual contractors who have different demands and to make sure that you're doing it efficiently required us to add staff, which increased our costs. And I believe last year alone, we spent over $2 million more than what we received in transportation funding. And you fast forward that out throughout a 5-year forecast, that's an extra $10 million that we did not budget. And if you remember and you looked at our financial situations last year, we were short $17.7 million that in 5 years out. So that's a lion's share of that deficit.
That is absolutely wild to me. I didn't even realize the whole kind of sharing transportation thing was a thing until very recently. And just it is a logistical nightmare. That's what it comes down. It's absolutely insane. And $2 million extra, or compared to what you received, is not that's not pocket change by any means. So that is truly significant. Thank you for sharing that. Allie, can you share a little story? I hear you have a nice little anecdote about school choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I grew up, I did go to private school when I was younger. And, we do say that school choice, it's not anything new. School choice was always there. So it's important to note that in the Constitution, it does say that, every child should be afforded access to public school. It does not say that, students should be afforded access to all types of school, right? And so that is what we fund. We fund public school, right? And so my parents made that choice. School choice has always been a thing. And so I went to Catholic school. Students there were on scholarship, right? And so I think it's important to note that school choice has always been a thing.
So y'all have pointed out that private and charter schools face far fewer requirements around things like graduation standards and teacher certification and even basic financial transparency than public schools. Why does asymmetry matter, and what does the public not realize about it?
So I think what the public doesn't understand, and I see advertisements all the time. Hey, we graduate 100% of our students, and well, we graduate 100% of our students that complete all the requirements and remain in school. But unfortunately for us, students who don't stay in school and don't enroll in another school within the top from 9th grade to 12th grade are counted as dropouts. Other charters and non-pubs, they're able to look at a kid and say, this kid's not making it, withdraw them, right? And then they fall back to us. We are the district We are the entity that is required to educate students that live within our boundaries. And so if you live within our boundaries, if you withdraw, we get a notification that you withdrew. And then we need to try to pick you up and ensure that you are in school. And if we do enroll you in your short credits, or we can't get the information because they're not releasing it, then we're responsible for you not graduating and you become a dropout for us. We get students back all the time. And because they're not required to take state assessments, when they come back, especially at the high school level, they're behind. If they're not, again, they're not required to have the same curriculums we are. They're not required to do the science of reading type stuff that we are. So when the kids come back to us, they're at all different levels. We have a transiency problem here in our community. And so when you place all these schools within a community, the kids have the opportunity to just bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce. If you're not happy with this teacher, you go to another place. If you're not happy with this teacher, you move to another place. And what we know about students is every time they move to a different place with new rules and new expectations and new administrators and new teachers, they regress a little bit. And so it is not uncommon for a kid to start at one school, then go to another school, and then end up coming to us. And so not only is that kid lost time, records may have been lost, opportunities to educate kids are lost. And so these things add to some of our situations, which are difficult to begin with. And so not having the same expectations for these schools makes it easy for a kid to get lost, makes it hard for kids to matriculate through the standards. And again, makes it harder for us to know where kids are and for us to help them graduate on.
Yeah, that's really troubling to hear that there's a little bit of regression each time with that change, and just hearing how often you see that. That's truly, I don't know, that's fascinating to me, and obviously a battle that no one would think about. So thank you for sharing that. Can you talk a bit about the financial transparency piece for public schools?
So yes, and one of our goals here in the Canton City School District is to always be good stewards of the tax dollars that are afforded to us, both from the state and from our local taxpayers. And we work really hard at that. And one of the reasons we work really hard at that is because we're required to do so. If you mismanage public money, there's this little thing that the auditor can put down on you. It's called a finding for recovery. And they're going to get their money back, whether if that's coming out of your pocket or not. But that's something that we have to do. And so every year, the start of the year, state auditors rain down on the Canton City School District, and they spend months going through everything. And matter of fact, just today, our treasurer and our finance department was awarded with the State Auditors Award for a clean audit last year. And so that's something that all public entities have to do. What are you spending your money on? Are you spending it legally? Are you following your board policy when it comes to spending money? Are you buying the things that you're supposed to buy? And there are tons of policies about how much you can spend, again, without bidding and going through fair processes to make sure that you're hiring the right contractors. All of those things are things that happen. If someone wants to do a public record about, hey, you've got a credit card and you bought this with your credit card, our community can get that. Those things don't happen with private schools. And for most charters, they are private entities or nonprofits. So they don't have to report how much they're paying their employees. They don't have to report how they're spending their money. They don't have to report out if they're buying things that they're not supposed to buy with their dollars. And a lot of times when we come across saying that, hey, this isn't right, we're not saying that, hey, we're against choice. We're not saying we're against competition, because that's what I hear all the time. Well, you just don't want to get better. You're afraid of competition. I'm not afraid of competition. We're not afraid of competition. We just want there to be one set of rules. If the state is going to openly fund a different school system, then both school systems should have the same expectations. And whether that's a fiscal expectations or whether that's performance expectations. You know, if we have to make sure that our students are passing a test and we are dinged if they don't, then I shouldn't go online and see a school with a single digit passage rate in grades 4 through 8 in math on a test that they got to pick, let alone whether or not it was a state designed test. And I shouldn't see that. And if I do see that, then there should be some type of way for them to be held accountable like we are. And so that's all that we're asking. And the funny part about it is when the people who lobby for our non-pubs in the state of Ohio are asked about, hey, we think there should be accountability. They're like, no, we don't. That would be wrong. We don't think those tests work. And well, wait a minute. And then our folks in Columbus will say, yeah, we agree with that. They don't need to take those tests. Well, then why do we? And so those are the things that you see. And I think that the public doesn't know. We have a school around us that always touts, and they've been touting, and they've been sending mailers home that say, hey, come to our school because we have great facilities. Well, great facilities that we felt were not good enough for our kids over 30 years ago. So we got out of that building. We have great transportation. We do have great transportation because we provide it, right? It's, we've got really good grades and expectations. Well, I don't know what grades you're reporting because you're reporting grades that haven't even been released yet. And you don't even have enough kids in your grade and in your cohort for the stats you're given to be reliable. So it's those types of things that they're allowed to say that can't be verified because they don't necessarily have to report that information. And if they do report it, it's so late, right? When it comes to private school, when their data hits, it's a year later. It doesn't come out the same time as the public school data comes out. It doesn't come out to the fanfare of the press so that people can see it. It comes out in the middle of the school year, a year later, and it's snuck deep into the website of the Ohio Department of Education.
Oh my God. If my blood wasn't boiling about this before, it absolutely is now. It is truly like y'all are playing two different ball games. And you are certainly like, it's like they have a full baseball team and y'all have like 3 people. It's truly, I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people don't realize, I think folks in Ohio are starting to realize that what the voucher system is and kind of how it's unfairly taking money away from public schools. I think we're just now starting to understand that as a society within Ohio. But I think like everything you just said is just, oh my goodness, we could peel back the onion for hours, I imagine.
Well, and I think it's important to note too, and Paul does a great job as our union president educating our staff. Everywhere that vouchers in and of themselves have been on the ballot, even in the deepest red of areas like Kentucky, for example, that went 100% for Trump in the last election. Those counties unanimously voted down vouchers when independently on the ballot.
Wow.
And so, but these things are happening in the middle of the night when these things are happening in the last hour, being added to major budget bills in with no oversight, with no input from the public, right? They're being added into these big bills that have 1,000 other things on them, right? And so, overwhelmingly, vouchers are not popular, but we have never, as Ohioans, been able to truly vote on them. They're snuck into 1,000 other things.
Wow, that is just there are so many things in Ohio that our representatives are pushing forward or that's law that is really unpopular. And this is just yet another thing. And so, Jeff, I know you were talking about testing a bit, and I really love this topic, and I'm so excited to hear what y'all have to say about it. So, Paul, you described state testing as a traumatic snapshot of a kid's 185 days that ends up determining the teacher, principal, district scores, and ultimately funding and services. Can you explain that chain reaction and what it does to how teachers actually teach? And maybe is there a better alternative?
Well, a state standardized test should just be a snapshot of where your kids are, where your school might be. And that's really it. It can show you where your deficits are, where your weaknesses are. But here's what's hard to believe. And we throw these terms around very loosely. This is a performing school, this is a failing school, and blah, blah, blah. And so I really think schools should be evaluated on the opportunities that they provide for their stakeholders and their children. And that's really it. And so we have to make sure that our focus and our concentration is that we eliminate all barriers and that we provide equity and inclusion to everybody, and that they have the ability to take advantage of all the opportunities that are offered to your school district. And so in Canton City, we have second to none career tech centers, nursing programs. If you want to become, involved in the teaching profession, we have, starter kits for that, if you will. And so, unfortunately, here's the reality. This is what happens. So a kid shows up to school, and on any given day, they decide to test the student. The student, I'm not suggesting that they should be, but the student is immune from the consequences. They take the test, nothing happens to them, but the teacher is going to take those test scores, and it will be a reflection upon the teacher and be part of the evaluation process for the teacher. And so the teacher is judged by what the students did on that test, which then becomes all the teachers in that building then become a reflection of the principal and that building. And then that building becomes a reflection of part of the report card for the, and then this is where it really gets crazy. So when that test and the results are put out by the state, the only thing we learn from that is that the richest district in Ohio scores number one and the poorest district scores the lowest. And sure, there's a little bit of shakeup at the bottom there, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, we're not testing for a standardized test and where the benchmark is. We are administering a poverty test. We really are. And so it's absurd that if a district doesn't do well, you would think the state brings in as many resources as possible and your funding increases and we provide resources to catch you up. It's absolutely ass backwards. It goes the other way. And so you get punished for your performance. And if you don't do well, then there are things like state takeovers and there is the state coming over and they're in your business. And now you are mandated to have their literacy coaches or their numeracy coaches and that type of stuff. And so it's an absolute, it's so bizarre and it really makes you just wonder how that's even possible. Like in Ohio, are you serious that's how we're going to determine funding? We're going to test the kids. And then we should say this too, in many, many urban settings, and I'll use Columbus as an example. Years ago, I believe there was a superintendent who mentioned at one of our meetings that they have at any given time 79 native tongues at any given time. And we're giving these kids standardized tests. We have kids that sometimes come to us in kindergarten, and the benchmark that they're using to establish whether the kid is ready or not for primary education, we are competing against districts who sometimes their kids come in kindergarten and they're reading already. Right? They're the ones setting the benchmark, and that's what they want us to get to. And many times we have students through no fault of their own or through no fault of their parents who are hard workers and often have several jobs. Sometimes that just isn't enough. And sometimes our kids aren't ready to learn because they don't have the conveniences that we take for granted. And so because they're not ready to learn and we do our best, our teachers are fantastic, we catch them up. But nonetheless, everything because the state makes this about funding, we double down because we have to. And so here's what happens. So you may test a kid one time and the standards are very vast. And I'm speaking from English education. And so you see the test after, it's taken. And then, some teachers, we get in departments like, oh my goodness, did you see how much they had on etymology, prefix, root words, suffixes? And oh no. And so the next year you double down because there were so many questions on the test about that. And then you spend an inordinate amount of time drilling prefixes, root words, and suffixes in their head, and you won't see one question about that, not one. Or it could be character development. And so I think we're missing opportunities to get into deep, critical thinking skills. And sometimes we might overuse the test to use sample questions and let kids see as many sample questions as possible. In the meantime, the clock is ticking, the days are going away, and we're throwing everything we have at this one test because the consequences and the ramifications are so, that everything depends on it. And whether you stay open or whether you operate and how much money you'll receive, it all depends on one test on one given day that a kid sits down for 2.5 hours and takes a test and the state judges everything on that.
That is wild. I'm just like flashback to high school and standardized tests. And your specific example of like one year you hear the kids saying, oh, there was a bunch about suffixes and prefixes, and the teachers would teach that the next year. I have actually heard teachers talk about like, oh, this year, none of that was on the test. Like I actually have lived that example. But everything you just described, to boil it down, is just such an incentive to teach for the test because it's truly what everything depends on. That's your resources. That's funding for literally everything. And that is so frustrating. And I guess I didn't realize also how, the higher ratings, the more money those folks get, those school districts get, versus this school, was, underperformed. They obviously need more resources. Why don't we give them a little extra boost? Like that is equity at its, in its
Thanks.
actual definition.
Well, and I
Yeah,
think it's
and
also important to note too, like those parochials and those private schools, that those non-public like privates and things like that, they get to choose what tests they take. And these two can give a little bit more about that, but I think it's important to note that as well. So when they're releasing those test scores, they get to pick what test they're testing their kids with.
Funny how that works, huh?
And I think something that's just a body of research that is starting to show up more and more. Like, how do you get a test? How do you create a test that tests the whole subject area? And so when you really think about where, we've done more assessing in this country than we ever have. And I guess, not I guess, but in an effort to have standards and to improve education for students. But yet, throughout this whole time, the colleges are telling you that kids are coming less and less prepared. And that's not just districts that are struggling, that's all districts. And so that directly points back to people trying to prepare for a test. And when you look at folks who are telling you this, teach the power standards. Well, right. And so that if you're teaching just the power standards, you're not teaching everything that a kid is going to need to know and be able to do to really master the content. And before we got into this assessment, this race for assessments, that's what happened. If you were an algebra teacher, you taught algebra and you taught all of algebra and you made sure that the kids really got it instead of focusing and doubling down on here's what's going to be tested. And I think that those are the things that we have to look at. And something else that I find really funny is that there's a part of our accountability system called, the early literacy or tracking the early literacy component. And where a part of that, we are graded as a school district based on whether or not kids come to school ready for kindergarten. And they take a test in the fall of their kindergarten year. Within the first 2 weeks of kindergarten, they take a test. We don't have them until they show up to kindergarten. And so districts around us have 75 to 80% of their students pass that test when we're down under 40%. And so when you think about that, and then you say, okay, well, let's take that to the next year, into the next year, into the next year. So you'll have a district that has 75 to 80% of their kids pass the test, but by the time they get to third grade, only 85% of those kids are passing that assessment. So there's less than a 10% increase in the number of kids who are gaining and getting better. When you have us that are taking kids in that aren't going to kindergarten, not going to preschool, don't have a preschool experience, have not been exposed to the number of words. And we're taking that number and growing that number from 30% to almost 50 over the time that the kids are there. But that's not talked about, right? It's these folks at one of the school districts that I looked at, 85% of their third graders passed the third grade test in the fall. So they're in third grade, ready to go.
Wow.
So it's that type of thing. Our accountability system assumes that every kid is at the same place with the same resources and should be at the same place. Nowhere in the world do we do that. We don't take a kid at the YMCA for swim class and say, hey, you've never seen a pool. I know, but you're 8, you're 9, you should be able to swim one lap. So just go ahead and jump in the deep end because that's what the standard says you should be able to do. Right? We don't do that. We give you an assessment and we say, wow, you don't even know how to hold your breath. So you're going to start here. It doesn't matter how old you are. You could be 30 years of age. Swimming starts with blowing a bubble in the water, not in education. You're in the third grade. You better be able to read. Who cares if you haven't heard a word? And that's what happens. And in our district, we take kids from where they are and we get them, and it's about the journey. And I think that's what education should be as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like each story, each answer, it just uncovers how uneven this playing field is. It's truly crazy. Like I am learning so much. I am absolutely appalled at the fact that they test kindergartners and rate y'all on that. That makes zero sense. Oh my goodness. Wow, I kind of just want to sit here and bitch the rest of the episode. I don't know about you guys, but Let's transition to building takeovers, which is something I was also not aware of. So the state can take over buildings in the bottom 5% or below 60% capacity, even when local taxpayers have already passed levies to support them. You've also made a note that things like autism units, trauma units, and special ed classrooms are often what's keeping a building under capacity. So what's at stake when the state reps or when the state steps in to take over these buildings?
So that, the state has a couple of ways to take over buildings. And one of them, they just doubled down on it through an ESSER waiver. But right now in the law, it states that before a school district can dispose of a building, there's very few ways that we can get rid of property. But one of the ways is we can sell it at an auction. But before we can get rid of a building or even land, we have to offer it to a high performing charter school within our district. And then we have to offer it to those outside of our district. And then not only do we have to offer it to them, but we have to sell it to them at a fair market value for what the building could be used for as a school building, which is actually lower than the actual value of a building. And what that does is it makes it really tough for districts unless there's some type of competition between multiple schools to get the money that they should get for a property that they've invested in or we've invested in. And so if that wasn't enough, then they put this thing together that says if a building is under capacity for multiple years, then you have to offer it. So it went from, hey, if you want to get rid of a building, so hey, we're not using that building. We don't want to take care of it anymore. It's draining taxpayer resources. Therefore, we're going to offload it. Then we have to offer it to a charter school. But now it's, you're not using that building enough. Therefore, your kids are evicted, right? Get out. And now you have to put it up for sale. And okay, let's just run that down. Let's run with that. The majority of our charter schools have far less students than we do. So if we can't use the building at the capacity, they're not going to either.
That's such a good point.
Right. And so, but they get to keep it. And there's no thing that says, well, if you don't get it to capacity, you got to sell it back. And so it's those types of issues. And again, and there's their issue of, we have programs that have very few students. An autism classroom it caps out at 6. And then also in those classrooms, you need spaces for physical therapy. You need spaces for kids to cool down if they get escalated. And so a classroom of 6 might have 2 additional spaces that aren't used all the time. And so to say that, hey, you're 60%, that's based on the architectural drawing and not based on the program needs. And if you want to appeal the decision, then you have to come and explain yourself. That is definitely taking away local control. And some of the things that we've had here, we've had a building that we stopped using as a school probably about 5 years ago. And in that building, we run our homeless services. So when a family becomes homeless, we have materials that have been donated, but beds and bedding and those types of things, household goods that people have donated to us that we can help them get started. We store some of our special ed equipment that is used, specialized equipment that when a student leaves, we don't get rid of it. We keep it so we don't have to buy it again there. And then in the wintertime, our community uses it as a heating shelter for on really, really cold days. That is a way for us to help our community. And that is a great use of public tax dollars. Our safety forces also use it for training. And so if this law was in effect when we did that, that building would have had to been offered to another school. And our community wouldn't have had that opportunity to have such a great facility to be used in the middle of a neighborhood. And so we keep pushing, like, you've got to change that. That cannot be a rule. And then what happens if a building is something that you're still paying for, right? You passed a bond issue and population shifts. And so you have a building that you still owe money on. So are you to give that building away at below market value and somebody else is using your building while you're still paying the note? It just doesn't, it really doesn't make sense. And I always call it, I say bad policy has consequences. And so It is definitely a bad policy. I had an opportunity to speak on it in Columbus, and first of all, the whole committee wasn't there that day, and one of the committee members got up while I was giving my presentation, which I believe is kind of rude. But
Yeah.
there's a reason for it. I wish they would come out and just say what it is they want with this. We've had some buildings that we've offered up, and we've gotten nobody in our community, none of our charter schools who have bid on it. So definitely there's not a huge need, because we've done it 3 times and we've only had one get people who offered to buy it.
Wow, here you are following the rules, and it's not even working how the policy's written. That's crazy to me, because I feel like a building for a school for kids to go to school in is resource number 1, like ground zero. That is like a bare minimum where you have to start. And that capacity is especially with the special units. Oh my goodness. Yeah, there has to be a reason. You're so right. Like, what is it?
Well, if you don't mind, I think the reason is very sinister, as Jeff alluded to earlier. This started as vouchers for underprivileged kids, or the look of a school that wasn't succeeding. And as more kids continue to take these private vouchers, they need buildings. They need them. The state does. And so whether, they create this illusion that, that these charter schools need these buildings. And Jeff just said, hey, we got them. We're putting them up. We're offering them, and no one's biting. But I think the state, they're not really concerned about that. They just need to have a large inventory of buildings that they can use when necessary. And so that's the sinister answer. And of course, that's my opinion. And I feel like there's absolutely a reason, because it's so bizarre and makes absolutely zero sense, where the school board has already made these decisions. The taxpayers have already agreed to pay the taxes for these buildings. They belong to us. They belong to the taxpayers in the community, and the state is just wants to come in and have a process that they can take the ones that they want. So
yeah, no, that's a great perspective. It's a great example of folks who make policy are often not the experts, often don't have the experience of what they're making policy about. This goes beyond public education. And I think this is probably a really prime example of that. So let's transition to talk about STRS and teachers unions. So I actually know what STRS is because of my mom, but that stands for State's Teachers Retirement System. So from the 2025 changes to the STRS board make up to the history of collective bargaining rights like SB 5, teachers' retirements, and their ability to organize are both truly under pressure right now. What should people understand about what's happening to STRS and to unions, and why does it even matter to those who are not teachers?
Woo, that's a lot of questions, but I'll start with STRS, and maybe you can keep this going so I touch upon everything you asked.
Yeah.
But first off, STRS is a really unique system, and starting back with when teachers were expected to run the furnace, to make sure that they had coal and heat everything up and such, and so their conditions were less than ideal, let's say, at the time. And that same group, very quickly, there was a group of teachers in 1910 that started the first teachers union, and in 1920. They petitioned the state legislature a little bit before that, but it was actually became law in 1920. The first General Assembly approved the STRS. So teachers basically said, hey, we just don't want to be cast aside in our later years after we're done. We would like to have some type of system. So this is interesting because STRS actually predates Social Security. So the General Assembly agreed that it would be a good idea for labor and the General Assembly to kind of codify this. And so they did. It was legislatively approved, and so be it. In 1920, we started with STRS. The board was comprised of teachers and a few state appointees, and there was always a majority of teachers on the boards because it was obviously their pension system. In 1978, that even shifted even further. And since 1978, it's been 5 teachers, 2 retired, and 5 appointed through the state legislature. So we've always had the ability to control the decisions made for our pension system 7-5. And as you alluded to in the biennium budget bill in 2025, for no apparent reason, at about 1 o'clock in the morning, a gentleman by the name of Adam Byrd introduced legislation that would change that board, and the new composition would be 8 members appointed by the legislation and only 3 teachers to sit on the board. But they went even further, and of the 3 teachers that would be appointed to the board or elected to the board, none of them could serve as the chair. So they are not interested in our opinion anymore. And it's very dark. It's extremely sinister. It was done for no apparent reason, and it is a very, very healthy, solvent system. It's worth $110 billion. And so we now are at the mercy of these appointees. And so we could become just, part of a package that's part of a private equity firm. These people could gamble our money away. They could take very high risk investments, knowing that they got $110 million kitty sitting to the side. So this is, they did not do this to the firemen. They did not do this to the police officers. And so your question about why should we all be worried? Because this is the start. And so there are other models in other states, and it's shameful, but there are other models, and it is permissible for when the state does take over your pension system. Sometimes the state, when there's a hole in the budget, they will borrow against the state teachers' retirement system to fill in those gaps. And how the story ends, the money doesn't get put back. In Oklahoma, about 3 months ago, it was sitting in committee. They wanted to give the private school teachers a raise. And you guessed it, they didn't know how to give them a raise. It wasn't in the budget. So they're taking it out of the state teachers' retirement system in Oklahoma. So there's some of the things that could happen. I don't see any set of circumstances where there are not already plans of what they're going to do with that money. I mean, you just don't do that in the darkness of the night at the 11th hour. There's certainly something dark and sinister, but there's a lot of things happening, and these are my opinions, and I certainly wouldn't want to make them anybody else on this, but there's no question this is just one of the pieces to tear down public education. It's like a tangled web right now. So with the vouchers, that's STRS. That affects STRS because every single student that we lose to a private charter or a parochial school, those teachers do not pay into STRS. So as we lose students and we can't feed the system any longer, then we start seeing where we have districts who are so tight fiscally that they can't offer teachers salaries, and they go backwards. And so we're going to get to a point right now where there are going to be a lot of retirees, and now we're shifting teachers over to other types of education that do not pay an SRS, and you can see the problem there. It's a huge problem. And so it works now because teachers who make money are supporting the retirees, but it's very possible within the next 5 to 10 years, there will actually be teachers who retired making higher wages than who are supposed to be feeding the system. So it's very likely that it could collapse upon itself. And then at the same time, they continue to go after collective bargaining rights. And, in 2011, they struck down collective bargaining. We obviously took it to the ballot. We overcame that. But it should never be lost that in 2011, we lost collective bargaining. In states like Wisconsin and Michigan, they've been fighting ever since to get them back. So that's how you weaken unions. If you can't collectively bargain, you're collectively begging, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you look at states that do have unions and states that do not have unions, and I know Allie can probably jump in here, and we're proud to say this, and I think it's fiscally responsible to do this for retention and treating people like professionals. But I'm happy to say that in Canton City, if you're at the end, if you're at step 32, and even if you're at step 15 and you have masters in 32, you can be treated like a professional and make $100,000 a year in Canton City Schools, because we have a union that negotiated with our school board, right, and with our administration, and they thought that was important too, that we treat people well. And that's what you get. And I just wanted to really quickly touch upon something Allie pointed out too. As you start to tear down unions, right, a lot of times there are groups of people who think this is the necessary and the right way and the direction to move in. But when we put this before the voters in 2011, as conservative as Ohio is, and maybe it's grown more conservative, but even at that time, when that was put on the ballot, it was defeated 62-38.
Wow.
So regardless of what political party you come from, people believe there's unions should exist. And she alluded to vouchers as well. The scorecard on vouchers in the United States, when it's put on a ballot, whether it's a red state, doesn't matter what state it is 17-0. Nobody wants to pay for some child to go receive a private religious education. They just don't know about it. They literally don't know about it. And every time the vouchers expand in Ohio, same thing. They're always put in a budget bill. Nobody even understands this. Nobody. And I feel a little bit confident now because I think that's starting to shift. And people are education has risen to the top in the Ohio governor's race. And so we're talking about unions again. Thankfully, we're talking about STRS. And so all of these things, it's like a tangled web, and they're all meant to be thrown at us all at the same time.
Yeah. That's a lot. Tangled web, I think, is an understatement, truly.
And I think too, and I'll get into a little bit of my experience in a non-union education state, but a piece too, a little bit to tie in and transition. Even the teachers who now are currently in charters and in private schools and things. My dad was a union carpenter. We talked a lot about, I was very much raised in a union home on both sides. But a piece too that I think is important to note that say the public education union falls, say things don't go our way in November, people have to realize that like their wages are what their wages are because of our union contracts currently. Their wages are in competition with union contracts. Say all unions fall. Guess what? That's construction. That's all union. That's anything that's in competition with the union. You're getting paid what you're getting paid. Your benefits are, your safety, everything is what it is because it's in competition with the union. If you're not having that standard to compete with, you're going to lose it. So I just like to point that out because, that was preached into me as a kid. It is important because you are making what you're making. I hear from, people who are in the parochials and in the charters right now. Well, my wages are going up right now. Yeah, because you're getting the vouchers. But guess what? We lose our union. You're not going to make that anymore. But yeah, so as Paul said, I can talk a little bit about that. So like I said in the beginning, I spent 2 years in North Carolina. That's where I started my career. And, I was warned a little bit, like things are going to be different. Holy crap, were things different, right? So I knew it was going to be different, but there were just some things I wasn't prepared for. And don't get me wrong, some of the people that I worked with down there, a lot of the people were incredible. Some incredible administrators I got the chance to work with, but my heart broke. And my heart continues to break. Because I'll be honest, two of the administrators that I worked with down there, they had their doctorates and they were in year 20 plus. I am almost making right now, going into year 4, what they were making. So yeah. So like, let's start. Just no grievance protection. Like you have an issue. So, we had a unit down there that you just didn't have the resources. I would joke, you could play connect the dots with the bruises and scrapes on my body from these kids, but you want to complain? My administrators wouldn't have done this, but I heard about administrators like, you want to sound the alarm bells, you want to make noise, you want to do those things, like you're gone. And because they just don't want to hear it. So you lose that protection. You lose that, okay, I have an issue with my administrator. I need someone to come in and talk to me. Like you don't have that. You don't get to have that open communication and dialogue. Something that was just, something we very much take for granted because people love to say, oh, teachers get paid all year and they don't even work all year. No, we get paid for the 10 months that we work. It's divided up over 12 months. Down there, nope. You get paid 10 months and guess what? You get paid once a month. And this is standard across the state, no matter what district you're in. It's countywide districts and you get paid the same no matter what district you're in. Well, guess what? You tend here to make more in the inner city districts. That's what draws people to work in the inner city districts a lot of times, because guess what? If you want to deal with the stuff that's going on in the inner city versus a suburb school, like the pay incentive helps, right? So no matter where you're working, and whether you're in Charlotte or whether you're in the rural area, you're making the same. You get paid once a month. So guess what? Your paycheck's higher. So what comes out more? Taxes, right? I literally, the last couple months of school, I would cry because I felt so bad. I would witness teachers get together and they would sit down and financially plan on how they were going to get through summer, even with their second and their third jobs. And these are teachers with 15, 20 plus years in on the job. It was heartbreaking. So thankfully, I am in a position as a counselor, I didn't need a sub. I got very sick when I was in North Carolina. I had a lot going on. So I very much used more than my 3 sick days that I was allotted for the year. Because guess what? After you use those 3 days, you need a sub. Money's coming out of your paycheck to help cover that substitute teacher. So thankfully, I did not need that. Extra hours. So, Jeff and I were talking about this a couple days ago. He was talking about a principal he was talking with from another state. We talk about how like I get all of my staff meetings nice and organized on a calendar at the beginning of the year. We only get so many. They're this long. They have to give us a 2-week notice, blah, 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 blah. Oh, no. Hey, we have a staff meeting tonight. You have to be there, period. Okay. Because guess what? You don't show up, you could grounds for firing. Now, again, I had administrators that wouldn't have been a big deal. And I feel the need to say that because they're fantastic. And I have a feeling they'll probably watch this and I don't want them to feel like I'm talking about them because they were great. But, you could immediately be fired for something like that. Like that's the reality. Like there are no protections. There are no things. So, a community event until 9:00 p.m. on a Friday, you're staying. Like these are the realities. And so benefits, terrible. I was sitting in this meeting because I was considering getting dental and vision because thank goodness I was not 26 at this point because I would have completely been screwed. And they were like, okay, so we're in your health insurance meeting. All right, you want an ambulance visit covered? Here's an add-on. You want a heart attack, stroke, or brain aneurysm covered? You need this add-on. You want an injury incurred by a car accident covered? You need this add-on. There was like 15 add-ons for like anything that wasn't a basic hospital visit. And finally, I like raised my hand. I was like, so could you explain to me and to these people what this covers?
Right.
And it was literally your basic doctor's visit. And I was like, this isn't normal. Like, it was the deductible, the premiums, everything. I was like, my heart was just broken because they're all incredible. No protected planning or lunchtime. And for, all of those teachers, they could not fathom that teachers in Ohio sat and ate lunch by themselves. They all sat at that table, ate lunch with their students. There's no such thing as you get to go out and get lunch. No, you sat at the table with your students. You were monitoring lunch. You were opening milk. You were doing everything with your kids at that table. Planning, you might get it, you might not, but there's no you took 3 minutes from my planning for this event, so you owe it for me 3 minutes here. None of that. Absolutely none of that. You're lucky if maybe you got it that day, but if you didn't, you just sucked it up and moved on with your day. Because guess what? The music teacher might be sick. There might not be a sub because we think we don't pay subs here. You don't even want to know what they were paying down there, right? So guess what? You're covering music today, right? Not paid for higher education. So I was not paid to have my master's down there. The only way to get paid down there was to be nationally certified or to have your PhD. And it wasn't a remote pay bump that was worth it. And it was really, truly low to mid 60s at retirement. And then because of all of these things, guess what? Who wants to teach there, right? So I was at 2 different schools when I was down there. I would say almost, if not at least 50% of the teachers in both of my buildings were literally not from the United States of America.
Wow.
They were bringing in, now granted, some of those Jamaican teachers, I am still scared of them. Their classroom management was on lock, but they cannot find teachers because no one is going to work for that. So you had all of these, no one from the United States is going to work for that. So you literally are bringing in teachers from Honduras, Colombia, Jamaica, all over the place because you cannot find teachers in that state. And so I've had multiple friends now who have, moved into Charlotte for our generation's really big and that kind of stuff. So people move down there. I would say I know 4 people who have all moved down there, did not make it 2 years in education before they left, and they will not be back.
Wow.
I can confidently say probably if he had stayed in the military, I probably wouldn't have stayed. It cost me money in the long run. It cost me money working in education down there. And as much as I love it, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And you have incredible teachers and you have things down there. And I'm talking to them and they just cannot fathom that, what do you mean you shouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck? What do you mean you shouldn't be living the poverty line as an educator? And so it is important. And I share these stories with people because we in Ohio as educators have a privilege that we have always had. Any living educator has had this privilege of living in, even if you're not a member of your union or a union member and you're at a parochial or you're at a charter, you're reaping the benefits of the union, right? Mm-hmm. And so it is important because we could lose that. Mm-hmm. We have a candidate that is actively campaigning on dismantling the teachers union. That is a major component of his campaign. And so we talk about that and we have to talk about those things.
Yeah.
Because if we lose this, everything will fall.
Yep.
So,
absolutely.
We
need to protect it at all costs.
And I'm not someone, I didn't clear, I'm not someone who's afraid to talk about, I didn't clear $30,000 with a master's degree. I made more as a part-time pharmacy technician in my master's program.
Wow.
Like, it's insane.
We are running short on time, but I have one question left for each of you. What's the most important thing people can do right now to support our public schools? We'll start with Paul, then go to Allie, and wrap up with Jeff.
Well, the future is now, and I'm going to do this super quick. When people realize what a scam this was and our students want to come back to public education, we used to have 4 high schools. We have 1. We used to have 4 middle schools. We have 2.
Wow.
We just closed, 6 elementaries, Jeff, or some. And so my point being is we need more Allies. We need young people like yourself that thank you for what you're doing, because that gives us confidence. Like, this stuff wasn't around last election cycle. And I do believe that it's growing, and there's a consciousness in Ohio. It's spreading. It's tangible. You can feel it. You can sense it. And so the future is now. And if the bleeding doesn't stop this time, and I hate to be cliche, I really do, but I really believe that serious pain for public education is on its way if it doesn't go our way in November. But I'm very confident and thank you for your program, and thank you for having us. And just wanted to leave you with that. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I would say, you need to remember that the future of public education is saving public education at this point. For me, come November, no matter how it goes, I want to feel that I did everything that I could to save public education, because it's worth saving. I want to have no regrets. I'm young. I'm on the chopping block. I'm fully aware of that. I love what I do. I don't want to feel like I could have done more. So my cry is, young educators, you've worked really hard for this career. Do you want to regret that you didn't do anything to fight for it? And for those in their mid to end of career, you've worked so hard. It's time to fight to protect your retirement, and it's time to fight for the next generation of educator. Anybody who has talked to me in the last 2 to 3 years knows what is happening with public education. Just last week, my poor phlebotomist and hairdresser got the whole rundown, right? So it's all that I talk about. So now's the time to talk to your people, call your representatives, volunteer for candidates, get active on social media. If we don't fight now, there's not going to be anything to fight for. So I have a call to action. You need to check your voter registration. You need to make a plan to vote. You need to help your friends and family do the same. Every vote matters to help save public education. So educate others, do your part, and it is time to vote.
I love it. Oh my gosh, Allie, you're hired. We preach that all the time. Okay, Jeff, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And so as a public school superintendent and being here as a superintendent of Canton City Schools, and the same thing that I say to my staff when I speak to them, I don't have an affiliation other than red and black. So I'm not blue, I'm not red, I'm red and black. And that's the Canton City School District. And what I need this community and everyone listening to understand is that we are at a crisis. I think it's a crisis that was seen once before. And when you looked at the separate but equal clause that was voted on a while back, and when you looked at schools to say that, the equal protection clause, when you look at it and say, does separate but equal matter? And can it be something that happens and fairly? If things continue to go the way they're going, where there's a public school system, a publicly funded school system that can pick and choose who they educate. And when those kids go, the other school system is shortchanged. You are going to end up with communities that have better education because they choose to tax themselves and they have the resources to do so. You're going to have students who choose to go to these private schools because they have the resources to do it. And then you're going to have the have-nots that do not have the opportunity to get the type of education they need to move forward. And that's what I ask people. I go, should your zip code determine the opportunities you have in life? And that's not the country that I grew up in. And that's not the country I hear people talk about. And so I think that's the call that I want to give to people. You need to pay attention to what's going on. You need to pay attention to what the people you choose, no matter what side you're on, the people you choose to represent you, you need to make sure that they have your best interest at heart. Because once it's gone, trying to get it back will take longer than it took them to get rid of it. And that's when you really think about how long it took from the late 1800s to the 1960s to get to where we are today. Once it's gone, it's going to take forever. So people need to pay attention. They need to educate themselves, and then make sure the people that they pick to represent them are truly doing so.
Thank you all so much for spending the last hour and some change with me and talking through all of the crazy hoops that public education is currently. I think the hoops are even on fire, having to jump through and fighting for your lives and the future of Ohio, because truly public education is the future of Ohio. And so thank you for what you do in your day jobs, but also all the advocacy and everything that you push for and stand for outside of school hours. It is truly incredible. Like I am so inspired by all three of you. As I mentioned at the beginning, I could never, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. So thank you so much for everything you do. And listeners, please share this episode. Please tell folks how important this election is. Thank you all for listening.